it's one of those old school films. Nowadays, you've got films, haven't you, which are very sort of wafer thin, very sort of paper thin, very sort of throwaway, nothingy, and the writing, the screenplay is just a nonsense. It's written by someone with the mind of a child. This is the opposite of that, right? This is a real film. This is a real story written by adults who know their business, and I just can't recommend it enough for people. What are your most general thoughts and feelings about it?
Well, the thing about the film is that it's led by two actors at the top of their game. Right, they're both Peter O'Toole and Catherine Hepburn bring their A game to it, and the scriptwriter James Goldman, him and his brother William Goldman are two of the best screenwriters in Hollywood, operating around the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Again, as you said, they know what they're talking about. James Goldman, I would say with the film, it's set in a historical time. These are real historical people, but what he's doing is that he's filling in a gap. He's looking at the lives of these people, and he's going, Henry is this powerful king. He's the first Plantagenet king. He ends the civil war in England. He expands his empire into France. He dominates the French. He dominates the kingdom surrounding him, and he has a succession crisis. And we know his sons lead multiple revolts against him, and we know Eleanor of Aquitaine is the most powerful woman in Europe, and he has to lock her in prison because he's a troublemaker. And that's what we know from the history. And what James Goldman does is that he fills in the gaps. He takes an incident that's not recorded in history and he extrapolates what we know from the historical record into this intense family drama that takes place over Christmas.
Mm,
And I
mm.
think the dialogue, the plotting, the intrigue, and the performances, it just all comes together in this. It's a very intense film.
Yeah, no, it's great. It was originally a play, I understand, which didn't do that well.
Mm.
But no, as a
No,
film, it's absolutely superb. And as you say, all the actors really bring their A game. For me, Catherine Hepburn, she got an Oscar for it.
yeah,
Absolutely brings her A game, steals every scene for me. And that's
mm,
saying something when you're up against the likes of Hopkins and O'Toole. But yeah, also this idea that the tension or the drama of people that love each other and despise each other. And
mm,
luckily my family isn't anywhere near that intense. But
mm.
there's that sort of dynamic in families in all sorts of ways that you wouldn't dream of actually hurting each other, but you also kind of hate each other and all those sorts of very extreme dynamics going on. Obviously, it's dialed up to bloody 20 in this family. But yeah, just the dialogue is also absolutely superb. And well, one thing I just would like to mention is that they did do a remake of it in like 2003 with like Glenn Close and was it Patrick Stewart? I've
Yes,
watched a bit of it. I haven't even watched it all. I couldn't get through it. I deny it. It didn't happen.
yes,
Um,
I see what you did
you
there.
know, um, yeah, we're not going to be talking about the 2003 or 2005 or whatever it was version
No.
of it. Just a classic 1968 one. So yeah, I guess where would you like to start? Because one thing I was just found out I had known before, but I'd forgotten, but that it was Anthony Hopkins' film debut. That's remarkable, isn't it?
Ac- It was the film debuts of the four young actors. It was three of them were making their debuts. So most famously, it was Anthony Hopkins' film debut. He had been a rising star in the mid '60s in the Royal Shakespeare Company, and all four of the young actors were cast because of Peter O'Toole. Peter O'Toole just said, "Okay, he loved the script. He convinced Catherine Hepburn to come on board because they'd known each other for years." And he said, I need an older actress in her late 50s, early 60s, who is a legend of the screen. And it was either going to be Catherine Hepburn or Vivian Lee, but Vivian Lee, I think, had died just a few months previously. And he said, it's got to be Catherine Hepburn and no one else. So he made the call to her. And then the casting director put forward all these names of young British actors who were on the up and coming, and he met them. and he said, right, Hopkins, he's great. He understands what he needs to do in this film. And then it was also the film debut of Timothy and John Castle playing Jeff. He'd only had one film. That was Blow Up in 1966, and he guest stars in an episode of The Prisoner. That's the sum of his film acting experience. And they hire these four and then just drop them into this intense, brilliantly written period drama with Peter O'Toole and Katharine Hepburn. And the fact that they all four of them hold their own and they all have their moments. I mean, it's a testament to the way that film comes together, particularly in the performances. They all know what they have to do. They all absolutely deliver those parts. And that's the problem with the remake, is that it just, they're fine actors, but there's no magic. There's no chemistry in it. There's none of that absolute rawness that you get with the 68 version.
No, absolutely. I think John was probably the weakest performance, and it's still great. I think Jeffrey, is it John Castle? I think his performance was absolutely brilliant. There's no one weak in it really. Yeah, I watched about probably half, 2/3 of the remake, and it was, as you say, no magic. You know, I gave it every opportunity I could, and I couldn't finish it because I love the original 68 version so much. I've had it on VHS when I was a kid. When sort of the internet happened, it was among the first films I had downloaded. I've watched it, I don't know, 20, 30 times? I don't know, a silly number of times. I rewatched it last night for this. I haven't watched it in maybe a year or two. It's one of those films that every year or two, I find myself rewatching it. Never get tired of it. It's quite long. It's over 2 hours, isn't it? And it always seems to flash by for me. It always seems to flash by. I'm never bored. Never bored with it, even though I've seen it so many times.
Yeah, it goes at such a pace, and that's partly to do with the dialogue, the intensity of the scenes, and the speed at which the actors perform it. I mean, O'Toole is just he's playing a 50-year-old man, so that's older than he was in real life. He was only 36, I think, but he plays a 50-year-old towards the end of his life so well. But there's a kind of manic energy to Henry II as he's trying to scheme. I think we should talk a bit about the plot and the historical background.
Sure.
But the production of it, I think, as you said, it was a play and it wasn't very successful. But everybody involved in producing the play and directing the play realized how good a script it was, and so it was sold on to a film producer, Joseph Levine, who had produced, I think, the 1964 Beckett, the other Henry II film. And so he said, okay, let's get Peter O'Toole back to play this role. And it is a cracking script. And in the end, it worked out better as a film than it did as a stage play.
Yeah, I would like to see it on stage, just because. But yeah, I was reading that it sort of lost money, which is strange. But I mean, that's the thing with the theatre, is that it has to be in the right theatre and promoted in the right way. Otherwise, it will probably fail. But yeah, it got nominated. Was it for 7 or 8 Oscars, and it won 3. I think the score. Not Best Picture, but Hepburn won for Best Actress, and anyway, critically acclaimed. And anyone that watches it, will enjoy it. I think films from that era sometimes to the 21st century sort of TikToker mind sometimes are very, very slow. I've got no problem with that, of course, but lots of people do. This isn't slow, right? It's not slow. It jumps straight in. It absolutely jumps straight in. It introduces all the characters, and each one is sort of a gem of a character, and it never slows down. It just keeps going. So yeah, some of the historical background, it gives you a fair bit. It sort of lets you in. You don't need to know about the late 12th century and the reign of Henry Plantagenet to watch this film, but nevertheless, we can talk about it a bit. Yeah, he's got this empire, the Angevin Empire, and it stretches from the Pyrenees to Scotland, essentially, and including parts of Ireland and all sorts of things. And the Kingdom of France is relatively small. It's nothing like modern France. I mean, this takes place at Chinon, which is in the middle of France, south of Paris. So that gives you an idea, and that's Henry's land, part of Henry's land. So that gives you an idea that France, the Kingdom of France, is kind of Paris and the areas around it in all sorts of ways. Is nothing like the modern map of France. Henry controls most of what we in the modern day call France. So the power dynamic, the King of France, Timothy Dalton, is a far, far inferior partner in all of this, although still powerful. And it's only a generation or so before, it's about a generation later when John becomes king. This is the real history, where Philip gets the upper hand and takes lots of French lands off of him, but that's a different story. In the 1180s, he had the eldest son, the eldest surviving son, another Henry the young king, who had been groomed from the earliest age to succeed. He was heir, and everyone expected him to, and all the other sons were just sort of spares, if you like. And Henry the young king dies, and all the accounts, all the histories agree that was sort of a devastating blow. I mean, kind of obviously it was a devastating blow, but not just sort of interpersonally, not just for the family, but for the history of Western Europe. It's a blow. It changes everything. And it means now that Richard, if not just Richard, but Richard, along with his scheming mother, Eleanor, the Duchess of Aquitaine, now see themselves as, they are, power players very much in their own right. And there's all sorts of tensions with them and Henry. Would you like to talk a touch about that?
Yeah, so what we have, the film touches on, it mentions the young Henry's death.
She knows young Henry's dead.
And that's the purpose of Henry gathering the family together at Chinon, is to settle the question, because Henry's got a scheme, which is to bypass Richard and go straight to John, because Richard's grown up under his mother's influence, and John's grown up under Henry's influence. And the original plan is obviously Henry was going to become king. Richard would be he'd be like a one-man fire brigade. That would be his role as the second son. He would go off and fight the wars. He'd fight the battles. He'd go off to the Crusades, and he would represent the Plantagenet family on the battlefield. And Geoffrey would be groomed as an administrator, and John, there is no set role for John in the original plan. But once young Henry dies, the film has it that Henry II he knows Richard's got the qualities of a king, but he's not going to make it easy for him because he is his mother's son. And so he's got this plan that it will be John, and that he will personally groom John for the role and bypass Richard. Keep Richard probably on as the battlefield general. His role would be, whereas John would sit on the throne, Richard would fight the battles, Geoffrey would run the administration. That's Henry's. And he would marry. Yes, there's another significant character of Alice, who is a relation of Philip II of France, and she's going to either marry Richard or marry John, depending on which way Henry's feeling. But Henry would like to keep her as his mistress.
Johnny wouldn't mind.
I do.
And that's not part of the arrangement he had with Philip II's father. So it gets really complex, all these webs. But it is, it's this dynastical issue that Henry's trying to play 4D chess. This is a very popular buzz phrase in 2023-24, but that's essentially what he's trying to do. And hasn't quite reckoned on Eleanor, who also is very adept at playing 4D chess.
Yeah, so we must talk a bit about his relationship with his estranged wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine. So originally she'd been married to Louis VII of France, and Henry had nicked her off of him, essentially. This is decades before 1183. And the idea was that Henry the young king would inherit, And at that point, the plan would be that Richard would be made Duke of Aquitaine, Geoffrey would be given Brittany, and John would not have any lands. Well, he was called Lackland, John Lackland, for a while.
Yeah.
But of course, when the young king dies, all that has to change. You know, Richard is almost certainly probably going to become the king, and so you have to reshuffle everything. But already by that point, Eleanor had been in prison. So long before this, when Henry the young king was still alive, he'd raised a revolt against Henry a long time before this, along with his mother, and so Henry had put her in prison. Literally just detained her because she could not be trusted. Now, as you said earlier, it's a good point that James Goldman is sort of filling in gaps here, because although the record isn't too bad for Henry II, we don't know in detail what happened during the Christmas of 1183 at Chinon. So the screenplay, the story is essentially a fiction. But, you know, he must have, or did have, certainly, a very good grasp of everything. There's one great line, for example, where Eleanor says that she went on crusade with Louis years ago, and she wasn't sure if who was in charge, who was the most important, whether it was God or Christ, or whether it was Uncle Raymond. All small details like this that shows he's got a very deep knowledge, a pretty deep knowledge of the real history.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.